Hi, my name is Adam. I'm co-founder and VP Engineering of Viv Labs and also Vice President of R&D at Samsung. A lot of people have come up to me and said, well, we want to learn about Bixby. We can download sample capsules, look at the videos, but I'd like to see you build a capsule from scratch, step by step. So that's what we're going to try to do today. Now, the first thing to get started is you go to bixbydevelopers.com, and that's your resource for all your documentation, your tutorial videos, and that's where you download the Bixby Developer Studio. When you download it, it looks like this. And it says I want to create either a new capsule or open an existing capsule. So we want to build something. We need some kind of data source or computational source. So let's take a look at Perfect Cartoon, the world's largest search engine. So as you see, it has an interface where you can search for any particular topic or keyword, and you get back all sorts of cartoons. I usually wake up screaming at 6:30, and I'm in my office by 9. Yep, that's perfect. It also has an advanced search capability where you can search by category, by caption, or by author, and it has a variety of categories that we can explore. So how do you create something like that for Bixby? I've noticed that Perfect Cartoon supports an API, and if you have an API, you're going to see it's a pretty straightforward process to make a Bixby capsule out of any data source or transactional source. So taking a look, we see there's a REST URL, Perfect Cartoon site search, accepts some optional parameters, keyword, category, and author, and then it's going to return a list of cartoons. Let's begin our capsule. So first we say create a new capsule. I give it a name. I'm going to choose example.cartoon. If you use playground, actually let's do playground/cartoon. Usually when you're getting started, you use the playground namespace, and when you're ready to submit the capsule, you can rename this easily to the name of your company. And so it's created the ID, version number, and it says my default target I'm going to be building for a mobile phone in English for the US. Now let's go back and look at our API. There's only one method call called search at this location, and search has these 3 arguments. So what we're going to do is create a model. I'm going to start by creating a models directory. And models are made up of 2 things: actions, which are really the function calls or APIs, and concepts, which are the objects or types used by that API. So I'm going to create 2 folders, concepts and actions. And let's create our first action. So we're going to call it, let's call it search, just like in the API doc. It's of type action. We hit create, and it generates a default template for us. We can give it a description. Searches the world's largest cartoon engine. It has a number of inputs and a number of outputs, a single output. So the type of output that we want to get, according to the API, is the response will have a list of cartoons. So we're going to return object cartoon, and we have inputs. So the inputs are, as we see right here, keyword, category, and author. So we'll have input keyword, and its type will be keyword. We're going to have 3 different inputs, so I'm going to copy this: keyword, category, and author. And the type, we're going to create a special type for each of these arguments. Okay, as you see, the IDE is giving us warnings and errors as we develop. So the errors are, I have a type, keyword, but it doesn't know anything about that. I haven't defined it yet. So I'm going to go under the concepts folder I created and define keyword. Now what is a keyword? It's going to be a text string. It can be anything. There's really no vocabulary because someone might say, show me cartoons about anything. So the type will be of type text. And the name is going to be keyword. And this will be a keyword to search for. Great. So now you can see the error has been resolved. Now I need to define category. So as we saw before, categories, they have a fixed set of categories in the perfect cartoon. So we're going to represent this as an enum. And the name is category. Categories. So keywords are just going to do a text search, basically, but a category can look for cartoons without that exact word. Maybe it'll be an office cartoon or an animal cartoon, even if the word is not animal, doesn't exist. And for an enum, something of type enum, you're going to list all of the possible values. So let's say there's a category called cats and dogs. If we look at the perfect cartoon, the documentation lists all the categories, dogs and cats and dating and God. I'm not going to enter in all of those here, but you get the idea. We'll enter in a few. All right, so back to our action. We've now defined keyword and category. Now author. So in author, what type, primitive type should this be? An author, it's not just an arbitrary string. We usually use a type name. So a name is, there may be some well-known authors that you could list in a vocabulary file, but it's not going to be a complete list like an enum. So we're going to use type name. I actually forgot to type what I was doing, author, and we'll just rename the file and author. Author of a cartoon. Okay, perfect. So I've defined the basics for my action, all of the inputs and their types. They're all optional, and I can have at most one of each. If it were required, and I change this, later on we could try this. When I say find cartoons, it'll say for what category. If I make this required and I don't specify it, but we'll keep it optional for now. And the last error here is I need to define the cartoon object that's being returned. So this is actually, it's not a primitive type like just a text string or an enum. It's actually a structured type made up of a number of properties. So cartoon, if we look in the documentation for the API, we see that a cartoon has 4 fields that it returns. There's image URL, so let me define this. Image URL, and we'll create a type for it. And what else does it return or contain? It's got a page URL. It has a title and an author. Title and author. Perfect. And now we should think about which are required. So a cartoon can't exist unless it has an image, right? That's the whole point. So we're going to make this one required. And the others, I think, are optional. If I got back a value without that, that's probably okay. There's a few errors showing up. I need to define the corresponding types. So let's create title. So a title is just basically going to be some text. And the last one is page URL. Also going to just be some text. And image URL. All right, now we have one warning on the action. It says I'm missing an action type, defaults to search. So if we actually want a search option because it's going to have no side effects. It's going to return a number of results. But you can see that Bixby has all sorts of different types for transactions, for calculations, but let's clear that warning by adding a type. So there we have it. That's the full model for our application that pretty well represents everything in the API for perfectcartoon.com. We have the action, we have its parameters that it's going to take, we've defined the return results and the types for each of the return results, and that's all we need. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add some natural language training, teaching Bixby how to map English words and phrases into the model of actions and concepts that we've just defined. Notice that actions and concepts remain the same no matter what device or what language. If I'm speaking French or English, a cartoon still will have the same properties. But if I'm going to speak to it in English or French or have a return result or dialogue, that's going to differ by language. And in this case, we're going to create it under the resources directory. So let's teach it some natural language training. We're going to do this in English for all regions. And we create. Now, what kinds of things would we say to search for cartoons? The first thing I might just say is find cartoons. When you add a training example, you need to do two things. Well, optionally two things. One is give it a goal. So what am I trying to get to? I'm trying to find a cartoon. The second thing you need to do is specify any input parameters. But in this, we have no input parameters. Ours are optional. And so you'll notice that once I've saved this model, I'm going to say, I'm going to retrieve cartoons. And it'll figure out how to do that. Next, let's say I want to say find cartoons by a certain category. Find dog cartoons. Let's give that as an example. Again, I'm going to want to retrieve cartoons as my goal. But this time, dog is going to be an input parameter. And what type of it? It's going to be one of our categories. So if I start to do this, you'll see autocomplete, that it's already said I've got a category where the value is of type dogs. I hit the save button, and you can see that if I pass in the dogs category, it's going to call the search action and output a cartoon. It's starting to write programs that will solve requests for me. Now let's try compiling the NL model and seeing how we're doing. Now we see right away that the first one is learned, but the second one is not learned. One of the main reasons why something is not learned is if we have an enum, we need to be able to define vocabulary for it. And here I've given, for an enum, it has to be a fixed set. And an enum is just a symbol. So I need to specify vocabulary. So let's do that. I'm going to create some new vocabulary. It's in English. It's going to be vocabulary for, let's see, this is for categories. Category. And so you define the type you're defining vocabulary for. If you see our category selection, we have cats, dogs, and dating as the three enum values of category. So I need to define English words that map to those. Now, each of those are a symbol. So if I take dogs, I could say, well, if I said find dog cartoons, that should map to that category. If I find cartoons about dogs, that should also map to that category. And we'll do something similar for each of the categories I've defined. Cats. And dating. Perfect. All right, and now if I go back to our training and I compile the model, let's see, now it's fully learned because every requirement is met. Perfect, so at this point, I can actually execute one of my requests. I'm going to bring up the simulator and make a request like find, let's see, find cat cartoons. When I try to run it, thinks about it, it's going to understand it. I don't know why it's taking so long.
I'm still learning how to do that.
Exactly. So far, it knows about searching, but we haven't told how to execute a particular request. If we look in the debugger, it has built a plan, a program, that it's taking my NL input, producing the category cats, which is correct, calling the search result, but at this step, there's no endpoint defined and no implementation of our action. So it says build an endpoints.bxb file. So let's do that. Now, first I'm going to define a function that implements my action. The action, if you recall, is here. It's a search that takes keyword, a category, and an author. So we need to write a little bit of code that says, what should I do for Bixby to execute that action? So I'm going to define this. We'll call it search. It generates a little template for us, and we have 3 arguments that we want. Keyword, let me look at it again to make sure I get it right. Keyword, category, and author. And we're going to return some structure. And as the debugger correctly told us, we need to define endpoints. So an endpoint is the mapping that for the search action, here's how to get from our model definition to what it should do. So the first step that it generates is authorization. We don't need any authorization for this particular action. And you have a choice. You can either have a local endpoint, which is a JavaScript file, or a remote endpoint where you're going to give a URL. In this case, let's write a simple JavaScript wrapper. So what we're saying is for the command search that we're defining here, we're going to accept a list of inputs, keyword, category, author, I think is what I said, keyword, category, author. And to execute it, I'm going to have code in a file called search.js. So it allows you to have a mapping between our action definition here to the code that I'm going to write here. Now, let's actually write a little bit of code. Our API requires a get HTTP call. So we'll write a little bit of JavaScript like this. First we'll use the HTTP module. We can say HTTP equals require of the HTTP JavaScript library. And we can read about it in the Bixby documentation. So down here at this button, this will bring up Bixby Developer Center. I can click on the search documentation part, and here I see that there's a JavaScript reference. There's a number of JavaScript libraries for date time management, for dealing with SOAP if you have legacy APIs, etc. And what we're going to use is the get URL call, which takes a URL and some optional arguments such as the cache time and the query arguments. So what I want to do is I'll have a URL, and the URL, according to our API definition, is this, perfectcartoon.com. Let's put an HTTP, perfectcartoon/site/search. We're going to call our HTTP.getURL function. with the URL. And we need to pass it these keys as arguments. So what are the options? Well, we have these different values: keyword, category, and author. And let's actually build an argument structure. Now these values, because they're optional, they may have a value or they may come in as undefined. So let's add them to our option list to send only if they actually have a value. So if it's undefined, if it's not undefined, then I'm going to add it to our option structure. And I'll do a similar comparison for each of our three arguments: category, category, and category, and author, author, and author. Great. So I'm making an HTTP call. There could be some error message. So let me put a try catch block around this. Just so that if there are any errors, the server's down or what have you, I can display the error. And I'm going to use console log for debugging. So I need to define console as var console equals require console library. All right. Perfect. So that should make the call. And if we look at the API, we'll see that it's going to return, sorry, API doc. We're seeing that it's going to return a list, a JavaScript JSON list with objects in it, and each objects have these 4 fields in it, which conveniently have mapped exactly to our cartoon model. So I can simply say that my return value equals a JSON parse of that structure. And we'll define the return value as an empty list if it doesn't find any. So that should do it. With that, I've done a simple wrapper around the API that maps from our action definitions into a call, an HTTP call, to a web service that's going to do the search for me. So let's give it a try, see if this works. Find dog cartoons. Comes back and it says here are 25 cartoons. I can drill in one. Now you see we haven't defined any layouts or views for this yet. So it's giving me a default view, but the fields are there. I'm seeing that there's URLs and there's text, etc. And we can see in the debugger that I'm returning different values. All of this looks as it should be. So next step is let's actually make it look like something. This is not a beautiful UI. And to do that, let's create a new UI folder. Now again, a UI could have text in it, and it could be different based on language. So I'm going to create a folder underneath the resources directory where I'm going to put our layouts. And we'll do this UI kit, layouts in English. And we're going to define a layout for the cartoon object. Whenever we're going to render our cartoon object, we want to say, how does it look? Now, layouts have 2 modes. There can be a summary, which is what you would get if you see a list, and there's a detail view. So let's first define the cartoon summary. So when I created the layout, it generated a default template. featuring some text, a paragraph of text. But for my summary, I just want to show an image of the cartoon. So if I hit the escape key, this will bring up autocomplete to show me a complete list of widgets and elements that I can use when building a layout. And in this case, I simply want to use an image. An image will have a certain number of arguments, again, autocomplete, and URL is the most important one. And I want to construct the URL's value from a field in this object. So to do that, URL will be a string, but I'm going to use the special command language to extract the value from the object, a variable named this that I specified up here, and its field, if we look at cartoon, is going to be the image URL is the one that we need. And paragraph I can remove. I don't need any text. So that defines a layout for a summary view. Let's give it a try in our simulator. Find dog cartoons again. Here are 25 cartoons, and that is much better. I'm getting a view of many different cartoons, and they all certainly seem to be about dogs. But if I drill into one, again, it's unhappy because I haven't defined a detail view. And let's do that now. So I've defined a cartoon layout of mode summary. Now I'm going to define a cartoon details layout. Again, we specify when this should apply. It will apply when we're looking at an object of type cartoon. The mode in this case will be details. And now I actually can, I think having some text will be good. I want this dot, I think we have a title field that I can display. Title. I have an author. Let me edit this. That'll be the title. I'm going to say it's by a particular author. And I still want the image to be displayed. Image. The URL, as we saw, is the same as before. Value this dot image URL. And we can use another attribute. Let's make the object fit so that we can see the complete view. We'll do it contained, so that way the actual display area will force the image to fit appropriately in it. Let's choose some styles for our paragraph. Maybe the text could be a label medium, and the author part could be let's make it a label soft. We have one more field that we could mention, so maybe I'll say see more on, and then we'll give the page URL. This is the URL that you would punch out to in Perfect Cartoon. So if I was here and I search for some cartoons, if I click on the cartoon, it's going to actually punch out to an author's page where you can buy the cartoon or download it or what have you. All right. Let's see. Legal property author. Let's see what's wrong with this. Cartoon. The property name is author. Nothing like static checking to make sure everything is working correctly. And it says these fields are optional, so they could be, it's giving me warnings. If you have an optional field, if you use a bracket like this will display it if it exists and not display it if it doesn't exist. So it's kind of a very nice notation for quickly being able to, instead of having to say if this value exists, then just by putting it in brackets will let you display the value if it exists. So now, let's give it one more try. Back to our simulator. Find dog cartoons, recompile because the model changed. I run. Here are 25 cartoons. I'm seeing the summary views, and when I drill in now, it's giving me the value, the author, but the URL didn't seem quite right. Let me see what's wrong with that. This dot image URL. I didn't put the brackets. There we go. Perfect. Reset. And now if I drill in, I'll be able to see the full cartoon is fit now to the display area. It's displaying the text for it. You don't chase me as much as you used to. That's pretty funny. It's got the author and a see more on. So now we've fully displayed our cartoons. So what's left to do? We're almost done. This is looking like a pretty good capsule. We need to add a little bit more training because we've only trained so far 2 examples, find cartoons and find cartoons with a category. Let's add a little bit of variation. Show me cartoons about, what shall we talk about? Programming, something like this. I add that. It's already starting to suggest some training. If I like it, I can accept it. It figured out that cartoon is probably the goal I'm looking for. That's correct. But it hasn't seen any use so far of the keyword. So it wasn't able to suggest that, and we can correct its proposal. And we'll just say that programming is a keyword in this case. Let's give it a few more examples, maybe with an author. I'd like cartoons by Harry Bliss, is one of my favorite cartoonists. So again, I'm going to define that my goal is to get a cartoon. Harry Bliss, I just select it and choose the type, author, and save, recompile, and now I've got a fair amount of variety. Maybe the user would say, show me dog cartoons by Harry Bliss. So let's give an example of that, because different parameters can be combined in various ways. So dog is of type category. Harry Bliss is an author again. Now, a person could, and I forgot to specify the goal, cartoon, save. So you can see the programs that are being generated that will run. We can try it. In the simulator, find dog cartoons by Harry Bliss. I have to recompile. Here are 25 cartoons. He sent a lot of cartoons. If I drill in, this is definitely about dogs, and it's definitely about Harry Bliss, so our system is working correctly. Now, our system is conversational, so perhaps someone would say, show me dog cartoons, just show me ones by Harry Bliss, right, with multiple steps. To do that, we can add a little bit of training. What if we just said by Harry Bliss as a follow-up? So here's how to create it. It's guessing that I do want a cartoon. That is true, that Harry is an author. Actually, that's not true. We want Harry Bliss to be an author. But because we want this to be a follow-up, rather than do this as a top-level request with no specialization, we can actually do training for contextual follow-ups. So in this case, we want to say as a continuation of a node cartoon, which means if I'm at a list of cartoons, one or more cartoons, and I were to say by Harry Bliss, I want to refine my request with context. So by giving an example like this, or what if I said about dogs, or about cats, or about, about programming. this would be an example where I'm doing a follow-up as a continuation of cartoon. And programming is going to be a keyword. So I recompile my model. Oh, I forgot to save this one. And now I have conversational interactions. So if I start out in my simulator and I say, find cartoons by Harry Bliss, there's going to be lots of different cartoons about all different topics. Let me try, or find cartoons about dogs. And I were to say, by Harry Bliss, I need to learn a second author. It's going to filter those commands to be just those about dogs. And so that lets you refine conversationally an interaction. So there we have it. We have built from scratch a capsule that can access a live web service using conversational interaction. We're able to give a top-level query like find cartoons about this or find cartoons by a particular author. We can also refine that query incrementally in steps. And this is almost ready to publish to their upcoming Bixby marketplace. So now I can get my capsule out in front of hundreds of millions of users. So there are a few last finishing steps to do to get this capsule ready. So the first is, you'll see that when I run the capsule, I want my branding to show up, and there's no branding here. So you can create an, we're going to define a capsule info piece. Let me show you this. New capsule info. This is going to be, I'll put it under resources. This is going to define a number of things for my capsule, such as its icon, a description. It's language specific, so it should fit under the English category. So I'm going to say I want to publish this as perfect cartoon. That'll be the display name. You can see that the old name is now deprecated, so I think I'll just remove that here. My company name, Perfect Cartoon Inc. And I can specify an icon. So my path to an icon, let's put it in, we have, let's just put, we'll create an assets folder. And I'm going to put my icon there. Let me find an icon. I think I have one here. I'll drop this in. So now I can have this as, it's called PC icon.ping. The description, search the world's largest cartoon search engine. Website, perfectcartoon.com. And terms and conditions, I don't think there are any just yet. So that allows me to define everything I need to start to publish this capsule into the store. And you can see my cartoon is now, my icon is now showing up as branding for my cartoon. The next thing I should do is when a user discovers my capsule in the store, I should give them some ideas about what they can do. So we're going to define something called hints that again will show up in the store. This is going to be cartoon.hints. And so in cartoons, let's actually start from scratch. I think these are deprecated. We'll use autocomplete. So hints can go into two areas. Some capsules are going to fit some published categories. If we click on this, we're going to see a list of all the possible categories that exist in the marketplace that I can publish for. But cartoons is not going to be a popular category. So in this case, we're going to just have the hints show up as uncategorized. And within this, I'm going to give some examples of questions about what kind of things would people say to my capsule. So I might say, find cartoons about summer. I might say, find cartoons by Harry Bliss. I might give some more examples, find dog cartoons. So that gives me the user some example about things to try. And that's pretty much it. From this step, you're now going to be able to submit your capsule. I'm not going to do this here, but you go to create a new submission. You can actually there'll be some automatic validations happened. Here I need to actually register this capsule appropriately, which I'm not going to do at the moment. But basically, that's how you build a capsule from scratch, A to Z, that has conversational dialogue. It has some layouts. It's accessing a live web service. And it's pretty straightforward from an API. And so I'm excited to see what you built. And look forward to meeting you in a Bixby Developers meetup or session in the future. Thank you.